opportunity cost of activities that do not occur because people are afraid of that first type of cost. But the third is a more profound type of cost, which is the gradual erosion of our pioneering spirit as people see organisations that are gradually driven back and discouraged from taking risks and making the most of opportunities, decide that actually maybe it's just not worth giving it another go. Those three costs, I believe, are very serious for our country, and that's why I believe that the Ministry for Regulation, its Minister, at this time me, and the Regulatory Standards Bill form an important parallel to the infrastructure government has around monitoring, taxing and spending. That is a Minister of Finance, a Treasury and a Public Finance Act. This means that ultimately voters find themselves better informed and better able to judge whether those elected in government are doing a good job to ensure that the rules put in place, the restrictions on the use and exchange of property, actually are made in the public interest, the least cost and best way for those restrictions to be made, and that we genuinely do have the best public policy in the world so that people can live longer, happier and healthier lives. I just want to quickly introduce two people who I know have appeared before the committee, even I think this week, Grania Moss, the Chief Executive, and Andrew, our Chief Legal Advisor. I'm very proud of the very high quality people who have stepped up to become employees of the Ministry for Regulation in its initial year. And today we're going to talk about some of the very real differences that having a Ministry for Regulation has made for New Zealanders, even in the less than 1 year that it has had an actually fully funded fiscal year under the budget. So thank you very much for those that have listened politely, and I look forward to answering further questions.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. You gave in good faith you're going to give some leeway to the opposition, and before the Minister had finished, we heard a rather unparliamentary outburst from Dr. Deborah Russell. I just wonder if that's the standard that we're going to expect before the questions have even started.
Well, no, the opposition have given me the undertaking that the disorderly will not break out, and if it does, then we'll have to revert to standing orders and speaking ruled. So I'm sure we won't, but fair point.
I'm sorry, what was the unparliamentary outburst? Would Deborah Russell
it was something
like
I should have kept under my breath.
I apologise. Well, just tell people would like to know.
I believe I said, for fuck's sake, in response to something you said.
Well,
it was unparliamentary and I shouldn't have said it.
Well, that's the standard of the Labor Party. They're swearing already.
So, Dr. Russell, you've withdrawn and apologised for that comment?
I have.
Okay. Let's move on. Dr. Duncan Webb.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. And I'm interested in your in running the kind of your own ruler of costs and benefits over the ministry itself. It's had 17 million this year, 18 million next year, rising to 22 million in total. Internationally, that's a lot of money to spend on this function. Office of Best Practice Regulation in Australia has a $5 million budget. Even the United States Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, which does exactly the same role, central oversight of federal regulations, cost-benefit analysis and regulatory reviews, has between 12 and 15 million US for a federal government. I'm just perplexed as to why we can't do things a little more efficiently here in New Zealand.
Well, I suspect it's that they haven't delivered the level of benefits that the Ministry for Regulation has delivered, even in the short time that it's existed. I mean, I'll give you one example. We have had modelled the potential impacts of the agricultural and horticultural sector review if it was to halve the time taken to consent new products. Then the net present value, of faster consenting to the New Zealand economy would be 272 million. So you go through it, I mean, 16, 18, 20, 22, you've got an average of 19 million. That one sector review, which is one of 4 done each year, sector reviews being about a third of the ministry's overall job, will pay for the ministry for the next,
Well, that's
shall we
not
say,
the question,
10
though.
years.
My question
So-
was a comparative question,
Mm.
and it was look overseas and see comparator institutions. Now, have you looked overseas? Are you benchmarking yourself against overseas institutions? I'll get to the agricultural review later, but are you benchmarking yourselves on international performance measures?
Well, you'd need a comparison to what benefits those other institutions have delivered. If you're prepared to supply that, then we can have a conversation. But so far as I'm aware, that data is not available.
Okay, so you're not looking overseas and the chief executive might want to respond, but if you're not, what I've got so far is you're not looking overseas to see what your overseas comparators are doing and how they're doing it and how they're doing it for about a quarter of the price.
Well, actually, the point is that they're not doing it. What they're doing is quite different, and they're not achieving the same benefits that we are. Therefore, we don't believe that the comparison is valid.
Well, in terms of the benefits you are achieving, I want to get to the regulatory reviews later, but in terms of improving the quality of material going through the house, there's been no tangible benefit that I can see. And in fact, if you look at the quality of regulatory impact statements, including the quality of regulatory impact statements coming from ministries with ACT members, they're falling woefully short. Gun reform, treaty principles, pay equity. Where are the reports from the Ministry for Regulation on those regulatory impact statements?
Well, the view I take is that the regulatory impact statements have not been performing for quite some time. There is a plan in place to improve those, and it goes like this. We are adopting new policy as a government under the Regulatory Standards Bill that we will have a new set of criteria or principles against which...
Well, hang on. The mission of the department started a year ago. I mean, you said yourself that in respect of pay equity, you didn't need to consult on it. Now, that's a total contravention of your own principles. Surely you don't think it appropriate that we don't consult on things that don't involve private property?
I beg your pardon?
Well, you said in the media that it was unnecessary to consult on pay equity because it didn't affect private property rights.
No, I've never said that.
On Guy and Espina, you said, when asked why you didn't consult, you said it didn't interfere with the free use and exchange of property.
No, I haven't said that. What I have said is that we are reducing the restrictions on people's use and exchange of property. The purpose of the Ministry for Regulation is to ensure that if the government is going to place new or greater restrictions on people's freedom, then those should be justified. However, if we are reducing the number of restrictions on people's freedom,
why have we seen no improvement?
Less justification.
Why have we seen no improvement in regulatory quality, notwithstanding your ministry's been in place for in excess of a year?
Well, as I explained in my answer to your initial question, there is a process in place. Passing the Regulatory Standards Bill is critical to that. That is well underway, and I understand the committee's going to have a good opportunity.
So for $17 million, we've got nothing.
Well, no, because as I answered in one of your previous questions, we've already begun a process of regulatory sector reviews, which have already saved New Zealand far more money than the Ministry has cost by a large
That's
factor.
moot.
Okay, I'm going to go to...
Well, excuse me, Mr. Chair. If somebody gives an answer, they should be taken at their word. Now, we've already had one Labor member swearing. We've now got another one who asked a question and then says, oh, that's moot in response to an answer. I think we need to operate in a bit of better faith on this committee.
No, I'm sorry, but I will respond to that. I do want to ask questions around that because it's very much up in the air as to what the benefits from your agricultural review are and the quality of the analysis that underpinned it. Let's get to that later.
Well, you're welcome to ask questions, but
Yes,
there's
and
no
I'll
point.
ask them in a themed manner. So we'll get to
There's
that.
no point in
Okay.
asking questions
good.
if you just criticise the answer as being dishonest or misleading.
Yeah, no,
I said it's
that's
moot,
good.
not dishonest.
Dr. Webb's had 8 questions is what I've counted so far. So that's sustained questioning for you. Francisco Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to sub off the primary line of questioning that Dr. Duncan Webb asked, which was around the budget for the Ministry for Regulation. Now, the briefing we've just had from the OAG says that the Ministry for Regulation
I'm sorry, from the...
Office of Auditor General
Oh, sorry, yes.
suggests that the says that the Ministry for Regulation overspent its budget by 0.9 million. What is the level of financial control in this ministry?
Well, if you think about that, even if we take that as being true.
But it was budgeted at 16 million last year and it spent 16.9 million. How is it not true?
Okay, good.
Well, let's take it as true.
Yes.
So we're doing that. And then we say, okay, you've got a startup ministry that is transferring money between different financial years, but actually remaining well within its budget over the 4-year period, and has managed to stay within, well, help me, about 5.5% in its first year, which we made up in its second year. So I would say that's quite normal in any organisation's budgeting, and it shows very tight control in answer to your question.
Isn't part of the reason why it stayed within its budget is that it's essentially been guaranteed funding increases year on year without having to be subject through the same baseline savings targets that other ministries have had to be subject to?
Well, of course, it couldn't be subject to a baseline savings target because that would require it to have had a baseline in previous years. As a new ministry, it doesn't have a baseline to compare itself with. The second point is, yes, it does have each year for its first 4 years a $2 million increment. As it establishes itself, it finds the staff. We could have, of course, started at 22 million, which will be its final budget, but we've chosen to start it at a lower level to recognise the fact that it takes time to grow its capability. For example, it spent its first year working on material which will be used to train others throughout the public sector to be better regulators, because often people say, well, it's not so much the rules we care about, it's the way they're applied. However, that's taken some time to prepare. In future years, there might be more scope to use those resources to better educate other regulators. So we've actually chosen to start lower than where we're going to end up, increment over time as we grow our capability to do good.
So are you guaranteeing then that the overall cap for the Ministry for Regulation in terms of what its final budget will be 22 million? It won't go over that.
No, that's for the first 4 years.
You expect it to grow beyond 22 million?
No, I don't have. You asked if I can guarantee it. I said no. I don't have any expectation, for the simple reason that future governments will set budgets, and they might budget more or they might budget less. There's no reason to think that it would be more. There's no reason to think it would be less. But it would be unfair to ask me to guarantee what a government might do in 4 years' time.
Okay, I just want to remind members that the briefings that we get from the Office of Auditor General are in confidence, and while you may be able to draw themes from them, the rule is that we don't quote directly from them as such. Now I'm going to go to Dr. Megan Woods. No, you're all right.
Dr. Webb.
Okay, well, I might just, before you go, Duncan, I might just jump over this side to Todd Stevenson or Dan Bidler.
Todd first, and then
good.
myself.
Okay, Todd, and then we'll come back to Dr. Webb.
Good morning. Thanks for being here, Minister. Obviously, we've already touched a little bit on these regulatory system reviews. You said it's about a third of the ministry's work. At the moment, there's, I think, around 6 criteria that are kind of looked at when deciding on these system reviews, things like productivity and regulatory burden, economic opportunities, social outcomes, etc. Can you tell me what you've learnt in the reviews that have happened to date, and will those criteria and framework be adjusted, and how is that informing the thinking of the ministry for the next set of reviews?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here. First of all, a lot of the changes that have been made, I don't believe would be made if the regulated party had to tell the regulator. Because often the regulator is in quite a position of power over the regulated party. I give the example of early childhood centres. I happen to be the minister responsible for that regulator, and I can tell you that we've had to really work hard on ensuring that the regulator operates well and leaves the regulated party, the early childhood centre, in a comfortable position. Nonetheless, I believe in a lot of cases, the centres and the regulated parties would not have raised the concerns for fear of the regulator. And I suspect that that's just a problem right across the regulatory environment. You could say the same thing about just about any regulator. So being someone that the regulated parties can go to means that there is now an advocate for the regulated within government, and you won't get that from the people who are regulating them. That's a conflict of interest. The criteria that we've used so far, I think, have been very sound, and we'll continue to use the same criteria for the foreseeable future. As you say, we're interested in how big is the impact on the rest of the New Zealand economy, how big is the impact of regulation on that sector, and how plausible is it that we can make improvements that will show a tangible benefit. And so at some levels, you will see, for example, the hairdressing review, actually quite a significant sector. Are they badly over-regulated? I don't believe that they were. However, counterbalancing that, we were quite easily able to remove regulatory burden and make a difference quite quickly. So that is a success for that sector, and one where, for minimal effort, we have made sure that $1 million a year will be saved in fees alone, and probably a greater amount in the inconvenience of compliance. That means that that sector review will basically pay for itself every year into the future. And it's a very good example of how this small but mighty ministry is one that is actually saving people money every year.
If I can.
Okay, we just had one sup there from Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you. I'm interested in the regulatory review process. Is it something you have input in as a minister, or is it something that the agency itself decides?
As a minister, I take recommendations from the ministry as to what sort of sectors we should consider, and I have some influence over that decision. I would describe it as a joint decision.
So would you say you have final sign-off on what the work program is for the regulatory reviews that are undertaken?
I wouldn't say that. It's a collaborative process. The ministry obviously gives me a lot of advice, and I take it very seriously. I guess in theory, I can just override things, but I think as a minister, that's unwise. Usually the people that are working full-time on a project will have very useful things to say, and you're wise to listen to them.
Okay, I'm going to go to a sup here from Ryan Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Minister. With regard to your framework around early childhood education, the review you've done in that sector, alluded to the $1 million of saving, and obviously that compounds over time. That review wasn't without some noise from the sector, but what are the key, I guess, benefits or extrapolates you've pulled from that review, not just financially, direct and indirect, but some of the other wider benefits you think have come from the benefit of this intervention?
So you're talking specifically about early childhood? Yeah. So if I was to just start with a general theme, I believe one of the reasons we have a problem with productivity in New Zealand is that we spend too much time on what might be called transactional activity, not enough time on what you might call transformational activity. It's the builder who takes longer to get consent than actually build the thing. And it's the early childhood centre operator who says, look, all I wanted to do was release the magic of young New Zealanders, and actually I spend far too much time on compliance activity, and in some cases too much time fearing the regulator. So what we've been able to do is shift them, or will do as this review is implemented, is shift them away from unnecessary compliance activity back towards more productive activity, actually unleashing the magic of young minds in this country. Now, how does that work? Well, there's basically three things. First of all, the rules. We found that there were 98 licensing requirements. By the time we're finished, a significant portion of those will be either gone, simplified, or transformed to guidance. The second is the way that the regulation is done. For too long, it's been very high stakes. If you miss any of these criteria, you can be shut down, when in many cases it'd be more appropriate to have a system, and there'll now be a 5-step system of, well, here's a warning, here's a more serious warning, and eventually we will shut them down. If it's something very serious involving the safety of a child, we can still shut them down immediately. But a much more graduated and proportional response, and there'll also be some changes within the regulator to make them, I guess, more accountable and appropriate too. So it's what are the rules, how do we enforce them, and what's the structure of the organisation enforcing them? All of those will change and give us a much more constructive relation between the regulator and the regulated, prioritising child safety while also making early childhood centres a much happier place to work.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to...
Thanks. I'm going to keep looking at how the regulatory reviews are selected. Because, you've got one that you did in agricultural chemicals, and you've got a clear connection with the agricultural sector through lobby groups there and through your own members. And then another one's ECE. You've got a clear connection to a one-time funder of the ACT Party, and certainly supporter of right-wing narratives, right? And the Right Family Foundation. So there's a real concern that it looks like there's an appearance of regulatory reviews being chosen to benefit parties connected politically, right? How can we have confidence that the decisions are not politically influenced and are made entirely on the basis of where best wins and values for New Zealanders are?
Well, first of all, the idea that I've got a clear connection. I'm the most urban MP in New Zealand. My main interaction with the dairy industry is probably through a flat white. And when I go and visit,
Well, one of your members
Let's just
was chair of
let's just let
Federated
the
Farmers.
Minister answer. Yep.
when I go and visit farm animals, it's usually the sheep in Cornwall Park. So the idea that I've got some sort of clear connection, I've got no more or less connection with rural New Zealand than anyone else. Now, you're right. I represent a party that has very good policies for rural New Zealand and is very popular with New Zealand, rural New Zealand. That is true, and I'm sure that that hasn't escaped your attention. But frankly, the suggestion that I have any kind of conflict is completely improper. Secondly, the idea that we decided to do a review of the early childhood sector because someone may or may not, I'm not even sure, have donated to the ACT Party a long time ago is frankly fatuous. And well, I'll tell you why we did do a sector review into early childhood, because it's a large and economically significant sector, because
My
it's a
question was
sector.
this: how can New Zealanders be confident that the sector reviews are chosen on the basis of best value for New Zealanders and not for political wins? Now, what I put to you is that you should have no part to play, that there should be no collaboration, and that should be a decision entirely within the ministry, because that's where you've got the expertise built up. And for you to then go and cherry pick, and I mean, is it the case that the agricultural chemical reviews was suggested by you?
So actually the agriculture and chemical was actually suggested initially by us, because the primary industry, us as the Ministry for Regulation, I mean, primary industries is basically the backbone of New Zealand's trade. So it was one of the first areas that we looked at. So we actually brought it to the Minister first.
Well, okay, and thank you for Ms. Moss for that contribution. I guess then perhaps you could explain to us within the ministry how this process happens, because I am concerned. And if you could go through, and I've seen I've seen your list of considerations, but what I want to hear is that there is no risk of political interference in the selection of review areas.
Okay, let the Minister respond.
Yeah, I think first of all, we really have to address this. The suggestion that there is some sort of improper interest is completely wrong. It's unparliamentary for the member to suggest
It's
it.
entirely within orders for me to talk about influence.
No, it's not. If you are suggesting that there's an improper influence in decision making, that is unparliamentary. The member's been a member of Parliament
do.
for a long time. He should have read the standing orders. But I can be absolutely clear that there is a very robust process for choosing sector reviews. In this instance, as we've just heard, this suggestion was from the ministry itself. And when it comes to the idea that an elected minister should not be involved in decision-making in government, well, that is just undemocratic. Of course, people have a right to be elected to Parliament, to become ministers, and to make decisions. And it's not actually their right, it's the right of the New Zealand people to elect us to do so. If you seriously believe that whole process doesn't work and that we should be governed by the unelected, then there's a few countries that you might find more comfortable. I won't name them now, but I'm sure you can guess.
Okay, we're going to go to Dan Bidwell.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. One of your ministry's roles is around stewardship of the system, and the big focus in this government, as you know, is around outcomes. I'm just wondering if you can elaborate for us what does success look like in terms of stewardship of the regulatory system? Because I know you're a small ministry, mighty, as you've said, but what does success look like, let's just say, from 18 months from now, and then maybe for the end of the forecast period, 5 years from now?
Yeah, no, good question. So if you look at over the next 18 months, our primary objective at the moment is passing the regulatory standards bill, having those principles in place, and that legislation, I think, will really assist with the quality of regulatory impact assessment, something that even the opposition are asking for. We'll also continue to carry out sector reviews. So you may have seen we've recently announced one in the telecommunications sector, which has been crying out for some intervention, or at least less intervention, for a while now. And you'll also see us beef up our, capability work, where we help mentor and educate government workers on how to be better regulators. If you look at over the next 5 years, we'll see more and more of New Zealand's legislation and regulation aligned with the principles of good regulation. Knowing what problem we're trying to solve, what are the costs and benefits of the rule, do the benefits exceed the costs, and who do they fall on, how are people's liberties and property rights impinged, and are we upholding the rule of law? Having these basic questions gives people confidence to invest. It means better jobs. It means better pay. It ultimately means a more prosperous society. Those are the objectives that we should all share. And yet, from what I see today, it seems that only some of us do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a couple more questions, if I can. So I don't know if you have any examples of success stories of where your ministry is helped provide advice or to actually improve regulation from another ministry. I don't know if you can talk to anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of we've talked about some of the big ones, but increasingly we see just really small things where people say, where do I go in government to report this problem? So, for example, the anti-money laundering regime was being applied to gift cards. So in theory, you had to trace somebody giving a gift card. This was really absurd. Gift cards are not a centre for organised crime. We have intervened and had that restriction removed. The people involved estimate that will probably cost them save them about $7 million. So it's not huge, but it pays for half a year of the ministry. Similarly, we've had concerns raised by a company that was being forced to test for flour dust in its bakeries. It turned out that there was no equipment sensitive enough to detect such flour dust at the specified level. So we've intervened and had that changed. There was a company that was offering buy now, pay later. There were restrictions proposed on the way that they could recover their fees that would actually make their business model unviable, because the regulations were really set up for credit cards. So we intervened, and that was changed as an option, and that's made that option of buy now, pay later, which a lot of New Zealanders value, more viable to stay in New Zealand. So those are, I think, three little examples. And through our red tape tip line, we've, I think, had about 600 people come through now. So we're constantly looking for these smaller areas as well as some of the larger ones, such as I think I mentioned, the hairdressing, the early childhood, the telecoms, the ag hort, and so on.
Thank you.
Just to up on there.
I've got a couple of subs lined up. You're happy for Duncan to take that one?
Look, you've said on a number of occasions, I want to give you an opportunity to correct that there were flour dust regulations. Now, I've seen the documentation. There were never flour dust regulations in force that required the 10 part per million test. The consultation from MB was whether the flour dust test should be changed from 1 part per million to 10 parts per million. So, and yet, time and again, you've suggested that you may change the rule to make it go back. Do you want to correct that, or are you going to keep saying something which is not accurate.
Well, I think you could argue it's something that's not precise. However,
Well, I would call it making shit up, actually.
Okay, hang
No,
on.
well, excuse me,
order.
excuse me,
Order. Can
Mr.
we-
Chair, can we just hear what this Labor minister has just said?
Well, I said, you seemed to make up that you had
No, why
changed a
don't
rule.
you say
when
exactly what you
clearly
just said?
you did, the ministry did have input at an early stage, and it said it would be untenable to change the standard. And MB listened to that advice, took it on board.
I think the member should say again what he just said.
I think
Look,
Not here to answer your questions.
I'm going to give
well,
I'm
no,
going to
you
give
should-
Dr. Duncan Webb the opportunity to withdraw and apologise for his swearing.
The standard we walk by is the standard we accept in this parliament. We've already
I
established.
apologise for swearing.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
right.
Yes. So as I said, you could argue that it was imprecise, but the facts are that there was a regulation that would have had a huge cost if it was put in place. It wasn't, thanks to the Ministry for Regulation. QED, the Ministry for Regulation, has saved people in this country money quite a lot, and I think that's important.
Okay, we're going to go to Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the examples of success that you've cited to the questioning by the member, Dan Bidwa, it's been to do with reducing the sort of regulation that's been available on people. You've characterized it as, burdensome restriction to liberties and freedoms of New Zealanders. Why then did the Ministry for Regulation not submit against the benefit changes that this government is doing? For example, it's restricting the liberties of people on benefits. It's requiring them to have payment cards. I saw in the regulatory impact statement that the Ministry for Regulation didn't submit on those things. So is it just a matter of a selective application of freedom on those that already have quite enough in society and not applying it towards our most vulnerable?
Look, thank you. That's actually an excellent question, and I think elucidates some of the misunderstanding in politics in New Zealand. You see, the thing is, a benefit is not actually a right. It's somebody else's money that is taxed off them and given to another person with a set of conditions. And the taxpayers who have the money taken off them, they do actually have the right to put conditions and mutual obligation around the receipt of that money. That is quite different from a person who owns some property, for example, perhaps their land or their section, having restrictions placed on that. For example, can they build a house on it? So there's a very big difference between the process I described at the beginning of this session, taking money off people and then applying it to public purposes, in this case benefits. That is taxing and spending, and that is overlooked by the Treasury. On the other hand, there is the process of placing restrictions on the use and exchange of property. And the difference is that a benefit is not your property, it's someone else's money that was taxed and given to you.
So you're essentially suggesting that there's two classes of New Zealanders. The people who have property should be able to have more rights than the people without property. That's essentially the implication.
Well, I'm not aware of any New Zealanders that don't have property. Remember, property includes your money, it includes your possessions, it includes real property such as land and buildings, it includes your car if you have one. I know some of you Greens don't like that, but actually every New Zealander owns property to some level, and the ownership of property is the surest pathway out of poverty towards prosperity. That is why it is so critical that we have a framework that upholds people's right to use and exchange private property.
If you don't know anyone without any property, Mr. Seymour, I suggest you get out of your Epsom bubble. But let me just follow up with...
Didn't you stand against me in Epsom?
No.
Oh,
that's
sorry.
Lawrence Dunant.
Okay, let's get back.
I'm often confused with my better looking.
Okay, one more stop, and then we're going to go to Dr. Woods.
I'm sorry. I thought you had.
I'm so flabbergasted by that exchange that I forgot
Okay.
my supplementary.
Well, you're both so studious and articulate. It's an easy mistake to make.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Minister. I'm interested in this line of questioning we've got around how it is that we're going to measure progress of the ministry and impact. Going back to the discussion you were having with Dr. Webb around the flour dust example, am I right in assuming then that the Ministry of Regulation is going to claim as wins things that could have been? So as has been established in the select committee process, you said it was not precise language, others would argue incorrect language, to claim that there was a measurement for flour already occurring. In fact, it was only under consultation. My question is,
Well, I can answer your question straight away if you like.
You can answer that, but I'll have some supplementaries.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely, because one of the ministry's key roles is to improve the process of making new rules. So yes, we absolutely intend not only to measure improvements to rules that already exist, but also improvements to rules that might have been made. I would say that they're equally important.
So what analysis are you putting in place to ascertain whether or not a normal consultation process couldn't have picked that up? In fact, it was revealed through MB's consultation process that that was not going to be a tenable standard. So what is the cost benefit analysis that the Ministry of Regulation is doing on its own work, and what could be achieved far more cost effectively in other agencies?
Well, again, if you look at the reviews that we've done, the benefits that they deliver are vastly greater than the entire budget of the ministry. Now, you could, of course, argue that if the ministry didn't exist, then regulations might have improved through other processes. The fact is that they didn't. And I suspect one of the biggest reasons for that is that once you put in place a specific process and say, right, we're going to go out, we're going to listen to the people who are regulated and say importing agricultural and horticultural products. We're going to have someone within government making the case for them that, actually these rules are wrong and need to be done differently. And often, and Grania will tell you often that, they have quite, shall we say, robust conversations with regulators about, no, I think these regulated parties are right, you need to rethink this. Then so if your question is, can you exactly apportion a dollar figure to how much?
No, that wasn't my question.
Then I don't think you can. But
the question was whether or not the Ministry of Regulation will be doing cost benefit analysis on its own work vis-a-vis alternative ways of monitoring regulation. My question is for you, Minister.
Yeah, well, so to the extent that we can easily point to savings that are a large multiple of the Ministry for Regulation's budget. Now, you could argue that.
So you will be doing CBAs?
Well, no. What I'm saying is that you can point to dramatic savings from the Ministry.
So no CBAs. That's all I needed to know. Just in terms of the $17 million.
I'm also explaining why.
No, that's fine. We've got limited time. Just wanted to clarify whether or not the Ministry of Regulation would be submitting itself to its own cost benefit analysis.
Well, that's a different question. If you'd like me to answer that question, I can.
You've already spent, Minister. You've already told us you won't be doing international benchmarking.
No, that's not correct.
Sorry, my questions are for the Minister. You've already told us you won't be doing international benchmarking with other agencies in response to earlier questions.
I haven't said that.
What I want to know then, you've made claims to this committee that your ministry is achieving things that international comparators have not. What advice have you received around our ability to benchmark against those international
let's have the Minister to answer.
If you need to constantly paraphrase and claim that I've said things that I haven't, then I think the public will make up their mind who's being misrepresented here. Second of all, if I can just refer, it is nice to be polite to our guests. And Grania would like to address a question you just made, so I'll give her that opportunity in case she'd like.
Particularly around international benchmarking.
Okay, yes, but with all due respect, Minister, this is the time for the select committee to question you as Minister. If you need your officials to step in for you,
but
I mean, I just think we're going to make a great video of the behaviour of Labor MPs on this committee, and I think people are going to decide whatever happens next year, we don't want them back over here.
Okay, let's put it to the Chief Executive.
Well, I'll make it very quick. I think, first of all, the range of work that the ministry does is quite varied and significant, and that's appropriate because the regulated parties all have different pain points. It might be interesting for the members to know that of the tips that have come through the tip line, 70% of people have told us they have not raised these issues with previous government departments. So it's a really good opportunity to hear about pain points. It would not be a good use of taxpayers' money to analyse everything and do a full CBA on it, but there will be cost-benefit analysis done at appropriate levels across a range of our work. Internationally, we have been reaching out and people have been reaching out to us. Our model of working is actually slightly different to many of the other international players. And that's because we're actually doing things and been given levers by government to either stop not helpful new regulations and improve current regulations. We will continue, because it is only our first year, to work with those international people, learn from them and benchmark where appropriate.
Okay, I'm just conscious of time. We're in the last 7 minutes. I'm going to go to Jamie Arbuckle, New Zealand first.
Thank you, Minister. We had the Productivity Commission. I know you're an advocate to wind that up, and obviously that got wound up and the money basically went into the Ministry of Regulation. That's my understanding of how that worked. Could you give me like the differences between the work that the Productivity Commission did and the work the Ministry of Regulation is doing?
Certainly. So first of all, the Productivity Commission was in operation for about 13 years, I think. I could be out a year there. It had an annual budget of approximately $10 million per year, and it produced, I think, some very fulsome, very high quality reports on quite a range of issues. I would argue that successive governments, regardless of which side, didn't really take advantage of the reports to the extent that they could. I think some of what the current government is doing around housing is guided, at least indirectly, by the excellent work that was published by the Commission in around 2014. However, in general, I would say that huge reservoir of work by the Productivity Commission is still there, and still there to be used by governments should they choose. Now, we could have continued with the Productivity Commission. They could have produced a lot more of these reports, but what we wanted to do was actually have a department that brings about real change. And so, as I've mentioned today, in the first 15 months or so that the Ministry for Regulation has existed, we can point to a large number of tangible changes to policy that have come about. And that's because we're not there to produce reports. I mean, the ministry does produce reports off its reviews, but that's a very small part of its business. Its mandate is to be a central agency, to participate in government policy making, to improve the standards of regulatory impact, to help pass bills, to conduct sector reviews, to triage red tape tip line. All of these are actually directly making changes in government as opposed to producing policy reports.
Okay, I'm going to go to someone who's been very patient, our member online, Ms. Kapakingi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Minister. I would like you, if you would, to explain the 0.5 million that was spent by your ministry on the urgent Waitangi Tribunal claim, Minister. If you could explain what that was spent on, why it was spent, what it was spent on, and what why are we better off because that was spent at all?
Well, it's certainly a very good question. Frankly, we spent it because we're required to by the law. The tribunal, as I'm sure you know, is a standing commission of inquiry. It has the right to call people to make submissions. If you're called, then you need to pay for legal representation. The ministry was forced to do that, and we did so. What benefit that brought, to be honest, I think the member asking the question might be better to ponder it than me.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, that's right. We're going to go to a final primary by Dr. Webb.
Yeah, look, I'm interested in the Regulatory Standards Board, and I guess it's appointed entirely by you, and the legislation as it stands doesn't really provide any guidance as to the qualities needed. And I guess I'm concerned that given the close relationship that the ministry has with the New Zealand Initiative, and Bryce Wilkinson in particular, that in fact, I mean, he has interviewed employees. Your chief economist was appointed, he was on the interview panel for it. I believe he was on the interview panel for the chief executive. I've got hundreds of pages of emails to the chief executive from him and to other staff within the ministry. I guess my point is this, are you just going to appoint to this board regulatory economists like Bryce Wilkinson, who essentially have a political axe to grind?
Well, a couple of things there. First of all, I don't appoint the board if the bill is to pass Parliament. Actually,
That's actually what the bill says,
What it-
but I know the cabinet procedure.
Yes, well, if you know cabinet procedure, then you'll be well aware that the bill provides for cabinet to appoint the regulatory
The bill
standards
provides
board.
for you to appoint them, but I understand the cabinet procedure, which is you would get your cabinet colleagues' approval.
Yes, so that's not really me appointing them because the other cabinet colleagues could veto a decision or approve a decision. It would seem that they're making the decision. So you either understand cabinet procedure or you don't. The second point I would make is that, you know what, Duncan, you got me. I admit, have been taking advice from one of, if not New Zealand's best regulatory economists, and he's been giving it to us entirely for free because he cares about public policy.
Well, not only that,
it is that bad.
He's been,
It
not
really
only
is that bad.
But someone from a lobby group called the New Zealand Initiative has been sitting on interview panels for public servants.
Well, first of all, they're not a lobby group; they're a think tank, and it's not unusual. It's not unusual for an expert, an outside expert, to sit on an interview
And to
panel.
have-
It's a normal
and to
public
have lunch
service
dates and
process.
coffee catch-ups.
I beg your pardon?
And to have lunch dates and coffee
you've
catch-ups.
you've got us again. Yes, we have been having lunch and coffee. You've got us
Yeah.
red-handed.
Okay, we're gonna just Todd Stevenson. and then we're
supplementary,
gonna move
Minister.
Top of the hour.
It seems Dr. Webb's very interested in the regulatory standards bill. Would you welcome opportunity to come back before the committee and talk specifically about that bill?
But he's ready.
Oh, if there was an opportunity for me to talk about the regulatory standards bill, I would be there with bells on. I think it's one of the most important
Already made a
things
decision on
that the government has introduced to Parliament. I think that it has the potential to greatly improve New Zealand's standards of living by giving voters more transparency about the rules and regulations being made. And, if people would like to talk about the regulatory standards bill some more, then wow, that would be fabulous.
Okay, let's draw a line there. We started 5 minutes earlier, so we'll finish bang on 10 o'clock. Thank you, Minister. Thank you. And we'll go to the Chief Executive.
Nice.
Well, it's going to be expensive.
Right.
See you later. So it's just.
No, it's just.
This is.
He doesn't have any issues with that.
Yeah, okay, we've got, thank you, members. Thank you, members. We've now got 45 minutes, and with the Ministry of Regulation, and I'll ask the Secretary and Chief Executive, Ms. Moss, to introduce her team. If there's anyone that, other than you three, that needs to speak or is invited to speak, please come up to the microphone so we can hear you and record you. Thank you.
Okay, well, good morning again, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So as you already know, I'm Gráinne Moss, the Chief Exec at the Ministry for Regulation. I'm joined on my right by Paula Knapp, who's one of our deputies who leads our corporate area, and also by Mr. Royal, Andrew Royal, who you've met before, who's one of our deputies for policy. And just behind me, I think, there's Paul there. Do you want to wave, Paul? Paul's the final member of the deputies, and he leads all the reviews and system capability. I would like to just do a couple of opening statements. I'll keep it quick because I know you'll want to get to questions. At the Ministry, we see that regulation is one of the key tools that government uses to shape how our country works. I mean, it affects nearly every part of our daily life, from how we travelled here today to how businesses operate, to the safety of our food and the strength of our trade. And when it's done well, it builds trust and confidence, and it helps the people and businesses get on and do what they do best. But when it's outdated or unnecessary, it slows things down, increases cost, and holds back growth. So in our first year, we have made real progress. We've reviewed the early childhood education sector, made 15 recommendations to Cabinet, all were accepted. The changes there simplify rules, reduce duplication, and importantly, let children spend more time with their teachers. In agriculture and horticulture, our changes are expected to unlock 272 million in benefits over 20 years by speeding up product approvals. And we're also helping small businesses by removing outdated rules in the hair and barbering industry, saving them up to $1 million a year. We've already heard earlier in the minister's section around some of the new rules that we've stopped, unnecessary new rules around buy now, pay later. One that he didn't mention was we're helping bring medical conferences back to New Zealand by fixing the advertising rules, unlocking up to $90 million worth of future revenue. And actually one I'm particularly proud of is we worked with the Ministry of Justice to raise the thresholds for carers who look after the financial affairs of their loved ones, so that they can actually focus on caring for their loved ones and do less paperwork. We have heard from hundreds of New Zealanders through our red tip line, over 700 issues. So look, our work is making a difference. And, you know, looking ahead, our focus is clear. We need to continue to do work to ensure that New Zealand's regulation is modern, practical and people focused. And we'll continue in areas like reviews such as telecommunications. We'll look at sectors with strong potential for growth. And we're also helping, I think, as the member mentioned, agencies design better regulations that are clear, necessary and easy to follow. So today, we look forward to talking with you in more detail about the work of our small team. Leading the ministry has been a real privilege. I'm very proud of our team. They're smart, hardworking and politically neutral professionals who care deeply about making regulation better for everyone and lives better for New Zealanders. In our first year, we've answered over 1,000 Official Information Act requests and written parliamentary questions from members of this committee and Parliament. We've been open and transparent about our work, and we very much look forward to your questions today.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Ms. Moss. Now we'll go to Duncan.
I want to dig into the sector reviews first. And first of all, I just want to kind of get a take on the role, because after the ECE review, there was a statement that I think came from the minister that talked about essentially that different enforcement tools will be used. Graduated enforcement tools will be used to respond to breaches, the remaining licensing criteria, giving the regulator a range of enforcement measures, changing the sector's culture from a punitive approach to promoting quality. Now, whether that's good or bad is one thing, but isn't it for the actual regulator to determine regulatory strategy rather than the Ministry for Regulation to be telling them what their regulatory strategy is? I'm just wondering where the line is between, a regulator doing their job and the Ministry of Regulation kind of being the boss of everyone.
So look, I think that's actually a very good question. So what we are is we are an independent government agency. So, and actually, I think a member over here, I think Mr. Arbuckle asked about the Productivity Commission. And if we look at how the Productivity Commission worked, it did these incredibly robust reports. What we are aiming to do is incredibly robust reports as well. But what we're doing is walking alongside the parties and being open about our findings during the reports. Findings from regulated parties, findings in that case in ECE from carers, from whānau, from parents, and from teachers. So what we do as we're going through our reviews, we share all of the information that we're collecting. We have a number of workshops and sessions with regulated parties, with regulators, and we test what might be good strategies. We also look at international best practice, and what we would say is that a number of regulators that we've worked with have welcomed our view and how they can improve. So
that's all advisory, I guess, but it might be just the minister kind of trying to claim wins, but I would have thought it's for the other minister to say, here's the regulatory strategy we're going to adopt.
I think what we have done, because we have been the leaders in the field of regulation, and we've been able to look at how regulators can improve, and we have provided that advice, but we've provided that advice through recommendations and evidence-based advice. Then what has happened when the reports have been finalised, they have gone to Cabinet. So it's for Cabinet to then accept the recommendations, and a number of the ministers would be representing the regulators.
Still on that theme of the reviews, I just was looking at, and I didn't get a chance to ask the Minister, the agricultural review and the claimed $272 million kind of win. Now, I get that it's a model and it has assumptions about what will happen in the future. But what struck me about it was that it was a scenario analysis. It wasn't a cost-benefit analysis. So all that it did was look at the uplifts, and it didn't look at any of the potential costs and downsides and risks. Now, that seems very unusual to use that, given that cost-benefit analysis is very much at the heart and centre of the Ministry for Regulation, to then pitch it as, let's do a scenario analysis. Why was that chosen? Rather than actually saying, here's the potential costs of changing the agricultural chemical regulations.
So there's a couple of reasons, and I think the other piece is actually all of the changes have not yet been made. So we would be anticipating that we will be reviewing all of our reviews over the longer term. So, for example, in agriculture and horticulture, there are some recommendations for some legislative change. Those haven't gone through the House yet. Once they go through the House, once we know the detail of those, we'll actually be able to track, well, what is the cost benefit of those actual changes?
This didn't take into account any of the costs. So if it just strikes me there's a real risk that you do kind of a business model approach and you say, for the industry, what's the uplift? Whereas a cost benefit analysis would say, and if there's a risk of an environmental leak, this is a potential downside, we need to put that on the other side of the ledger. So in terms of the economic analysis, you haven't done both sides of the ledger on this review.
So one of the things that we did identify in that review is that the way the regulators were working was very effectively managing the risk. I'm very happy to get our chief economist to talk at more length in terms of the number of analytical tools that we have and how they would be applied to different reviews, because not all reviews will have the same analytical tools because they're not actually looking, some of them are smaller, some of them are larger. We need to make them fit for purpose. Very happy to have the chief economist come and answer some more questions either now or later.
It might be a better use of time for me to put it in writing after the post-hearing question.
Okay,
but
thank you.
It'd be good if I think your economist is here.
Yes, he is.
I thought that was him. He was agitated. Perhaps I'll seek some explanation there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Webb. I'm going to go to a sup from Franciscus.
It's actually a primary.
Oh, it's a primary? Okay, go for it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Minister described your ministry as a small but mighty ministry and the third smallest in the government, I believe. Why has it got such a top-heavy structure? It's got 3 deputy chief executives, I believe.
That's
does it
correct.
Need that many?
Yes, it's got 3. Yes.
Does it need that many?
Yes, it does actually. It does need that many. So, I mean, there are clear areas of our work. So there's a great deal of policy work. So we have a dedicated leader for that. We have a dedicated leader for the work on reviews and also helping build system capability. And then we have a dedicated leader who's Paula on the things that make things happen, like hiring people, making sure that we're being a good employer, and making sure we've got safe IT systems, making sure we've got a building to work in, making sure that we can answer all of the Official Information Act requests, parliamentary requests that we get, and fulfill our obligations as a government agency, making sure that we get a decent report from the auditor, which I believe we have had, so, which has indicated good financial control. So,
yep, here you go.
Can you name another government agency with around 100 employees with 3 deputy chief executives?
I think you can happily look at a few other government departments. So, I mean, if you look at the other central agencies, there's some equivalents there.
Okay. We're going to go to Dr. Megan Woods. Did you have a sup?
Yeah, I did. And it is just about how you're working with those central agencies, what the structures that have been put in place to work within those central agencies. I mean, there is the potential for a large overlap with a number of those. So what, very briefly, what is the structure that's been put in place?
We have been very prudent about that because we are a very small agency. And we're very keen not to do duplication of work that others are doing. So, for example, the central agencies, the three central agencies, Treasury, the PMC, and also the Public Service Commission, have a regular meeting. We only go to that meeting when there's items that are of relevance on the agenda that would relate to regulation.
What would that look like?
So, for example, if they were concerned about the capability at a regulator, they might bring us in to have a conversation about that.
So what about if there's legislation going up that doesn't have regulatory impact statements? Is that something that would be discussed?
And that
those
isn't
meetings?
something that has been discussed to date with us by other central
Is
agencies.
that something that your ministry will start looking at? I mean, this parliament has had more legislation without regulatory impact statements since we've had a ministry for regulation.
Yeah, so we are working on formal reporting around the regulatory impact statements, and I think you will probably be aware that we had a change to the Cabinet circular at the start of the year around some of the requirements for agencies, and we will be doing public reporting in the near future on regulatory impact statements.
We could just, very soon, the public report, that's critical, right?
Probably first quarter of the next financial year. Yeah, so we're almost
So
in
the
that.
first, oh yeah.
This coming.
Okay,
July onwards. Yeah.
I'm going to go to this side of the table for a primary from Ryan Hamilton, and then I'm going to go to Ms. Kapakingi.
Thanks, Chair. Two short, sharp ones, if I can. The first one, the minister talked about, I think it was 98 regulations in ECE,
The first
or
time.
98, and you mentioned, I think, 15 that went back to cabinet. I just wonder if you could talk about.
So the 98 were the licensing criteria. So if
Right.
you want to open an ECE centre,
Okay.
you had to tick these 98 licensing criteria. Then we made 15 recommendations about the regulatory management system that overlays ECE, where improvements could be made. One of those recommendations was around changing the 98 to make it more streamlined.
Right, okay. No, thanks for that clarification. And just quickly also, the triage, the hotline, the regulation hotline, you mentioned, I think you said there's over 600 already.
Well, it's actually over it's over 700. It's almost 800 at the moment.
Right, and obviously you triage those.
Yeah.
Are there any particular themes coming out
Yeah.
that you can discuss now, or?
Yeah, so we actually also we've started to do a quarterly report on that as well. It's available on our website. So a couple of key themes. 70% of people tell us they haven't told government agencies before about this problem. We are seeing probably 5 main areas, a lot to do with building consent, RMA. But interestingly, one of the more interesting ones that we've got high volume on at the minute is small food manufacturers.
Okay.
So, what we're seeing is we're seeing trends in terms of volume. The other thing that we are able to do with our data is actually look at where it's coming from in the country. So we can look at that as well. And then we're also reporting on what are we doing with those. So, and a large number of them, we are working with the agency who is responsible for the regulator. And then others, we investigate ourselves, sometimes with another agency or by ourselves, and then we make recommendations to appropriate ministers.
Thank you. And I imagine it's quite a revelation in itself, just what comes out. But just to hear, ensure I heard you correctly, did you say 70% have already been in touch with government?
No, 70% haven't.
Haven't, okay.
So we're really quite pleased about that because it obviously indicates people have wanted to go somewhere but weren't quite sure where to go.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We've still got 30 minutes, members. I'm going to go to Ms. Kapakingi online.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair, thank you. Mōre nā koutou. There's a sub-questions, Mr. Chair, just on not the immediate previous to me, but the line carrying before. And it's around, Gráinne, you used the word prudent, which is a good word. And to that end, I'm interested in it related to cultural and competent competency across your team, in yourself or even your DepSecs and your whole team. And to be prudent when it relates to being Māori is critical to the capability of your team. And I want to know, have you got that? Are you getting that? How confident are you that you have that cultural Māori capability and competency across your team, and therefore all the understandings that it requires to create the working model that will relate to Māori and understand Māori, given the despise that Māori hold for regulation standards bill and anything else that sounds remotely like it?
Kia ora, thank you for the question. So in terms of the journey of the ministry, I mean, about a year ago, there was probably about 10 of us. So, we are still building on a number of fronts. We've only recently kind of hit our full kind of head count. I'm delighted with the level of diversity that we have and the capability, capacity and the talent that we've got within our team. But do I think we need to continue to develop our capability and capacity, our thought leadership, our ability to interact and engage with all of the populations of New Zealand? Yes, look, we're very small and we still have to continue to do that work. Which we are leaning into. We have engaged with a range of particularly Māori businesses. I mean, they've come forward and with their pain points as well. And it's been good to build on previous relationships that I've gained and actually my staff have gained in their careers as we engage across New Zealand.
Can I just confirm, Mr. Chair, sorry, just to sup on. So do you have any Māori clinicians on your team, Māori technicians on your team currently, despite the size? Because, every time, when people talk about diversity, it assumes that Māori's in that. We're not that we're not diverse, but we are treaty partners. So unless that's understood again, I don't have any confidence thus far anyway. Do you have Māori on your team? Māori clinicians, technicians, capability on your team, not because some Māori people. I don't mean that. I mean live, warm Māori bodies in your team.
So we have a number of very talented Māori staff on our team.
And at what level do they function at? So are they the receptionist or are they in your leadership design team?
I couldn't answer that question in detail, but we have some very significant intellectual heft in our team. And, we're a very small team as well. So to be honest, we don't really do hierarchy. Everybody knows each other. We have a stand-up every Monday morning that everybody comes to. I know all the staff's names. I don't tend to think about their what level they're at, but I'm delighted with we've got some fantastic capability.
It's a bit like Cheers, where everyone knows your name. Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you.
Supplementary, and then we're going to go to primary from Dr. Deborah Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be explicit and sup off the line of questioning that the previous member said, what would you characterize as your senior leadership team and what proportion of that are Māori?
I'm very happy to get back to the, I would have to go.
Okay, they'll come back to that. Right. Okay, I'm going to go to a primary for the Honourable Dr. Deborah Russell.
Thank you. I just want to dig into the appropriations. So the report on last year's appropriations, there's a couple of questions I want to raise in there. So in that report, under the leadership of the vote regulation, departmental output expenses, they were budgeted for 2,120 and they ended up at, 2,120, they ended up at 2,334,000. 2.334 million, something like that. Just a little bit above where you went to be, but it was a couple in the context. It was about 10% above. What was going on there that meant you just spent a little bit outside your appropriation in the year to 30 June 24? Yeah.
I mean, we started on the 1st of May with 6 people and a couple of desks. In terms of building the ministry, there was an estimate made. We made a little bit more progress than we expected, and that was great news. And Treasury were very comfortable with that, as have our auditors been.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that explanation. And I just want to go again to, it's the report on performance measures to June 24 and the assessment of performance. And in terms of the Minister's satisfaction with the Policy Advice Service.
Yep.
bit of a low score, unfortunately. I appreciate you new, but you said you're aiming for, getting an average score of 4 out of 5 or better, but you actually came in at 3.39.
Yep.
What did you do to lift that? I presume you've lifted it since.
Well, I think there's 2 scores. So just want to be clear, there's a score for the policy quality advice that's independently reviewed, and then there's a score for ministerial satisfaction. We did set our scores as pretty ambitious targets. A 4 out of 5 whenever you're first starting and you have no established relationship, no established work program is pretty significant. I can tell you that our ministerial satisfaction score has trended upwards. So it has actually it has risen every 6 months we do it? Is it every quarter? Every quarter. It's risen every quarter. So it is on the uptick. But on the other quality of policy advice, we did hit our targets. So we are seen as providing good quality advice as per the standards for the public service.
Okay, thank you. Just carrying on with appropriations, I'm looking at the supplementary estimates of appropriation for the year to this year, I suppose. So it's on page 770 of Treasury's report. Really want to look into yourself. And you were budgeted for the year 2024-25, you were budgeted $16 million. But there was a supplementary estimate there, 2 ones. One was capital expenditure of 356,000. I mean, I shouldn't say just whatever, but whatever. Yeah. But because I appreciate you had to build up the ministry. But then in that particular, that leadership of the regulatory quality system appropriation, you spent an extra 936,000. So in the context of a budget of 16 million, that's actually quite significant.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, we came in very close to our 16 million. I mean, for those of you who have obviously been in government before, you know that trying to land on the exact dollar figure is like trying to land a 747 on a dime. Again, the auditors are very comfortable, said we've got good financial controls, and we worked with Treasury in terms of forecasting where we would be at the end of the year, and then making sure we had all the appropriate paperwork to support that.
Okay, it's actually a 5% or a 6% overspend. And I appreciate, if you're doing your audit, something over 10% is significant, something under 5 is not, and there's a judgment in between. It does seem like quite a big overspend.
Well, I would say it's not, but I'll hand to my colleague here who can give you some more detail.
Sure. So the 16,936 million that you're referring to is made up of our original $16 million budget that was appropriated at the establishment of the ministry. And then in addition to that, a carry forward of the 23-24 underspend of $436,000 that was appropriately authorised. And also an initiative to bring forward $500,000 from out years to cover the cost of an urgent Waitangi Tribunal claim for the Regulatory Standards Bill. So that was all done within appropriate processes and approved.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions?
I've got another primary, but that can go to the bottom of the list.
Okay, this side of the table. Anyone? Yeah, we'll go to Todd and then we'll go back to Duncan.
So,
Todd
hi,
Stevenson.
how are you?
Hi.
Just want to talk a little bit about your strategic intentions document. And you've listed 4 outcomes in there, which are higher quality regulation, greater transparency, public trust and confidence regulation, and increased capability. And you've outlined a little bit about what how you're going to intend to measure success. But I'm keen to understand what progress have you made on actually some specifics around those 4 outcome measures. And yes, because obviously at the moment you've got how you're going to measure them is fine, but it's not very specific about what that'll actually look like. And have you made some progress on that? When can we expect to see more?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things before I go to my colleague, Paula. The strategic intentions was written very early on in the ministry's kind of birth. And we could have asked for an exemption, but we decided the discipline of actually writing things down was really helpful. What we do intend to do, so just to let the committee know, is technically we don't have to refresh those strategic intentions for another 3 to 4 years, but we're actually going to do it in the next 18 months because we have learned a lot as we have stood up the ministry. And we are continuing to develop some of our performance measures. So I'll hand over to my colleague who can chat more about that.
Sure. Yes, I think as you said, the ministry is evolving, and as we learn more about the way we're operating and what will be the most effective measures for us, we continue to review and revisit those. As Gráinne has said, we'll be refreshing our strategic intentions in early 2026. And they'll be effective from 1 July 2026. So we'll be intending to road test some new measures and try those out along the way. And of course, as has been discussed earlier, we'll be looking at things around impact analysis and how we can measure the impact of the work that we've done across a range of fronts.
Okay, I've got a sup from
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dan Bidwell.
Yeah, it's related to the performance outcomes framework. So, yeah, other countries around the world, they measure the number of, regulations added versus numbers subtracted. And I know that that's a crude measure for so many different reasons, but I'm really keen to understand, is that going to be within the consideration set of what this ministry will measure? Because I'm sure New Zealanders out there will be really keen to know, which governments are actually piling on regulation and which ones are taking it away. So, yeah.
Yeah, so the answer is we have had conversations in terms of landing on an answer. I think the other piece is there is obviously work that you as a committee are doing that is looking at performance for the public service overall. So we would want to integrate that into our process as well. Talking to some of the international jurisdictions who've kind of done the one in, one out, they have cautioned against that, partly because sometimes you don't put the right stuff out and the right stuff in. So, I mean, they've been liking the way that we have been trying to and have delivered some costings around regulations that we haven't progressed with and then regulations that we have removed. So, yeah, I mean, I do think it is good to look at, and I think one of the things that we are going to we should send to you is actually there's a really great slide from the Parliamentary Council Office that looks at the increase of legislation and then the overlapping increase because if you get increased primary legislation, you usually get increased secondary legislation, much of which is regulation. And there has been quite a significant growth over time. And what does happen is a lot of that becomes outdated, which is what we've seen in our reviews. So in hairdressing and barbering, the rules were 1980, but even in ECE, there was a 1995 rule law around holding immunisation records. That's now been superseded because those immunisation records are held elsewhere, but that had not been repealed, and that's one of the things that we'll do as part of the ECE review.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to Dr. Duncan Webb.
Thank you. I just want to talk about your capability to implement the regulatory standards bill. And there's kind of two threads I want to pursue there. The first is really just the cost. The RIS indicated that there's a $19 million cost of compliance across other government agencies. In terms of the department itself or the ministry itself, presumably the main cost will be the regulatory standards bill, which I'm assuming you'll host. Is that right?
The board, you mean?
Yeah, the board.
Yeah.
Board, yes. Is that right? You'll host them?
Well, we don't know until obviously everything goes through the parliamentary process, but I suppose we would, at the moment, it would be envisaged that we would support the board.
Yeah. And the board will be funded out of your budget?
That's what is proposed at the moment, yes.
And what provision is there for them? I see that the minister wants this up and running next year. Do you know what the cost of administering the board will be?
No, but we have looked at some equivalent type of boards that governments have put in place, and potentially around up to 2 million, maybe.
$2 million. So the salary for the board members, I mean, a chair of a ministerial advisory group gets around $200,000. Is that what you're thinking they'll cost?
No, there's a cabinet fees manual, and we've looked at some of that. A lot of the costs are actually going to be in dealing with regulated parties who bring complaints to the board, and actually we'll need to have some staff that work to support that complaints process.
So there'll be a whole secretariat
I
underlying it?
I wouldn't use the word a whole secretariat, but might there be a member of staff that supports that board? Yes, we would assume there would be.
So one member of staff.
We
and-
no, we don't know until we know
We'll
what.
have a deputy chief executive overseeing that.
We will have to wait until we see what the process says is required through Parliament, and then we will support that.
All right. And in terms of the bill itself, at Select Committee, you said that your ministry doesn't have the capability to read all the submissions that are coming in. Can you just explain exactly why that is now that we've got a bit more time? Because you're using AI to process submissions rather than reading them, right?
No, so I don't think that you're characterising what we've said correctly, but I'm very happy to hand over to my colleague. Are you talking about the approach that we requested this committee consider, that we partnered, given that we've only got 90 staff, that we partnered with some external resources to help support the submission process? Is that what the question is?
And my understanding is also that in terms of managing those submissions, they won't be read, they'll be reviewed by a appropriate piece of software.
So we have done some further work on that, which is what we said we would do following the committee. We've done some further work on that, and we do have some more detail about the approach we would like to take.
Okay.
Would you want to?
Sure. So the as we came to the committee last week and requested, we have now partnered with an external company in order to take that.
Is that Allen
forward.
Clark?
That is Allen Clark, yeah. I just want to go back a little bit to one of your previous questions, which is the reason is, I mean, we could have turned off a bunch of other work inside the ministry and deployed resource onto review of submissions and manage that internally. It would have just come at some significant cost to the rest of the program. So the point is really about the efficiency of whether you partner with an external provider in order to provide what is essentially search resource over a relatively short period of time, and have access to their expertise.
I am interested in people making submissions and them not being read by a person.
And we're going to take it, as I said, I think when we were here, and I'm very conscious that previous discussions we've had have been in committee, and this is a public forum. So
yeah, and that's why we're doing it here, so the public know what you're going to do. So are you going to process submissions without them being read?
The intention, we will approach the submissions. The question that we ask in any particular case might require reading of submissions or some use of technology to extract the answer to the questions from the data set. So it'll be a combination of reading the submissions in order to answer some questions and using analytical tools in order to answer other questions.
I'll put it to you a different way. On Saturday afternoon, I went to a public hall and spoke to 70 people who wanted to know how to make a submission on this piece of law. Can you tell that as if you're speaking to them, and why you think their submission doesn't need to be read by an actual person?
The process we're working through with the provider at the moment, and I just want to caution that we are still finalising that final design.
That's fine, and submissions are still open.
And submissions are still open. But the process we're working through at the moment with those caveats is that there will be human eyes on the submissions as they come in, but not for every purpose that we need to review those. So for some purposes, we'll use technology at this point, and it does ultimately depend probably on how many we receive, because submissions are still open. There is an intention for human eyes to be on them for at least some purposes.
How many submissions you received to date, roughly?
I'm afraid I don't know that.
That's Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really interested in this kind of topic, and I want to sub off what Dr. Duncan Webb has asked around it. In the earlier departmental consultation, can you talk through how AI was used there? Was every submission read by a human being there, or was AI used?
So for the process we ran back in
the departmental
January
consultation, yes.
For the departmental consultation, yes. So we used a combination of tools in that case. The submissions were, and partly that one was complicated by the fact that we had information coming in through multiple streams. So we had a form that we'd set up ourselves, which was gathering structured data across a series of questions. And then we had alongside that a series of emails that were coming in. And there was and then obviously there was a reasonably significant number of emails that came in. And again, it's a similar sort of answer to the answer I just gave to Dr. Webb. We were using different tools for different purposes in terms of understanding that data. So we used a combination of techniques, including Python and R and a large language model for different questions. So if you're asking a question, for example, about does the submission support, oppose, or sit somewhere between those two things, then you can use a large language model with a degree of confidence that you'll get a representative and robust response to that. One of the things we needed to do when that data arrived was ensure that the people had not been intending to submit on a different process. For example, there were other consultation processes running in government at that time, and possibly unsurprisingly, people had submitted things to us that in fact were intended for a different process. So we needed to try and extract those and understand them in good time in order to enable those people to engage with the process that they've been intending to engage with and go back to them. We couldn't wait till we got to the back end of our process and then tell them that. So we wanted to do that relatively quickly. Similarly, because unlike for the committee, submissions that are given to us are, to a government department. So if people have used that opportunity to make an OIA request or a privacy request or some other request for information from us, we needed to extract that in good time in order to be able to meet our statutory deadlines and respond to those queries. And so in that case, I think from memory, and again, with some caveats, this is a little while ago now, I think we were using Python script to determine where we could find OIA requests with a level of confidence through those things, combined with a reasonably significant degree of human eyes. So we were running processes and sampling and sort of diving ourselves into the data in order to make sure we'd extracted all of the OIA requests. And again, I'm very confident about that process in terms of us being robust, but being able to go back to people and provide them with further information, for example. So it is a little bit of a horses approach. And whilst it will be different because we're dealing with a different data set for the committee, we will continue to apply a sort of range of models, including human eyes to a very large extent across the data.
Not every extent.
Yeah, I'm going to.
If there's another time.
Yeah, Dr. Megan Woods, you had a sub?
I just want to go back for a point of clarification. It's very quick. Just from the questions that Dr. Webb was asking in terms of the cost of the director's fees. So you'll be using the cabinet guidelines, the director's fees guidelines around that. So I just want to.
So that's how we have developed an indicative cost at the moment.
And where do you see that fitting? I mean, there's various tiers within the cabinet director's guidelines. So what are some of the comparator boards that you're looking at in terms
I'm very happy to come back. I can't remember off the top of my head.
You'll come back. Dr. Webb, we've got 5 minutes.
Okay, look, thank you to Hello at Regulation, who I have a close relationship with.
We are very aware of that. Yes. We missed you when you don't email.
Yeah, so I got a bundle of emails late last night from you, and I do want to raise it with you, and I raised it with the minister in a more political way. But Bryce Wilkinson has had his hand on regulation since the task force. He was appointed to the task force, and he has a particular political and philosophical bent. The material that was sent to me last night shows that he has, a really quite close relationship with the ministry. And I know that he's attended for workshops, he's had catch-ups, he sits on interview panels, and emails you pretty regularly with his reckons. Is it really appropriate for someone who is so closely politically aligned with the regulation bill and this program to have a pretty cozy relationship with the ministry itself?
So I will absolutely object to the position of the relationship.
If you could clarify.
I'm very happy to answer this because absolutely not.
Order. if you could just give us some clarification over the role of Dr. Wilkinson, and we'll leave it at that. The minister has already traversed this.
So, one of the things that we as the ministry feel is really important is we have to engage with everybody. So my email is readily available to anybody, and they can ask to meet me, and they can email me at any time. We get emails from people all across the New Zealand economy, from the left, from the right, from the middle, economists, non-economists, business leaders, caregivers, everything, okay? And we treat all of those people with respect. We have no special relationship with Dr. Bryce Wilkinson. He is somebody who emails his thoughts, as do many other people in across New Zealand.
He sat on the interview panel for your chief economist.
As did a number of other
Point of order.
people.
Point of order,
As
Dan
did a
Bidwell.
number
Point
of
of order.
other
Just one moment.
people.
Point of
Can
order.
I remind the committee that that same individual advises this committee on monetary policy?
Oh, we have a huge problem with that too.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
That's not a point of order. So,
Okay.
There was a question about the interview panel, and the chief executive was going to respond.
So there was a number of economists that were involved in the appointment of our chief economist, and they came from a wide section of society. Some economists also input into the job description, as well as sitting on the interview panel or just inputting to the job description.
Okay.
And actually, we are absolutely delighted,
Okay.
by the way, with the
Last one.
appointment of our chief economist, who is doing incredibly well.
Can we just ask that we get a list of who those other economists were as well? Don't need to do
Dr.
it.
Webb already has that.
Okay.
Okay. Now,
He may not have the people who contributed to the job description,
That
but
would
I'm
be
very
useful.
happy to follow that up.
right. Thank you. I'm going to go to our deputy, Ryan Hamilton.
Thank you for your presentation today, and everything's been quite insightful. I wonder, given this is quite a new ministry, and and I guess in my view is quite exciting. But I mean, you guys are highly professional and apolitical. But what is the potential? I guess the potential opportunity in terms of what you think this ministry can reveal or contribute in terms of public policy to the welfare of New Zealanders.
So we are really excited about being in the ministry. It has been really exciting to be new. It hasn't been without its challenges in terms of trying to figure out, where do you work. I mean, it kind of probably comes back to that issue that we actually have been increasing the amount of legislation and the amount of regulation that has been occurring in New Zealand. And if you look at the House calendar, there isn't really a lot of space for regulations to be revised and updated. And that doesn't tend to be, and I paraphrase, the sexy work of government, but actually that kind of maintenance work is really important. And it's actually, through our reviews, we're finding there is a lot of outdated regulation, which, confuses the public, causes a burden, slows down growth, just doesn't make life as easy as it could be, and life's hard enough. So, we're really excited because regulation is a significant lever for government, and it hasn't had the attention it deserves. And also, the economy for regulation, it can be easy to pull a regulatory lever without understanding the downstream impacts. And then also not having a way of actually keeping that regulation updated. So, we've seen lots of opportunities, even the first year, I think, to have saved, thousands of New Zealanders some money, to have saved them some pain, to have made it easier for them to live their lives on a very small budget of 16 million. I'm incredibly proud, and our team are incredibly excited. And actually, we're getting really positive feedback from those people. We're getting positive feedback from carers saying, somebody listened to me and did something, you've made my life better. And, that makes it really exciting to come to work every day.
Okay. Let's leave it at that. We've had the full 46 minutes.
Thanks very much.
So thank you so much. Thank you.
I had a question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all right. Time keep
Out of time.
I know it's important to you.
Time expired.
46 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Moss. Okay, we're going to go into private session.